All right, Toby from DuraSeal here again. We're going to do a quick waxing demonstration. So we're going to be putting neutral paste wax over an already burnished dark gray quick coat. So we're going to be doing the application with a thick red pad that I have here. We're going to pop open the can of paste wax. And I'm going to try to scoop out with my stir stick here, which is good. So I like to put 4 or 5 scoops out, like a 1-inch putty knife is a perfect tool. This paint stick's going to work out fine. And just kind of scoop out and spread them around a little bit. Like I said, 4 or 5 seems to be a good starting point. It might not be enough, but it's always easy to add a little bit more wax, and you definitely don't want to have too much wax on there. So I always start with 4 or 5, and then I'll add as needed. When we put this on the buffer and start putting it on, it'll feel very frictiony and kind of fighting us, like the red pad has nothing on it. When we get the right amount of wax on there, it'll start to glide across the floor with absolutely no friction whatsoever. That's when we know we have the right amount on there. But like I said, we're going to start with that. It's actually not too bad. We're gliding a little bit, so I'm going to try to spread it a little. When you do have the right amount of wax on, you can generally go maybe 200 to 400 feet before you put a couple more scoops on. It feels just a little bit dry, so I'm going to add another touch of wax. It won't take much. If you see a little bit of stain transfer on there, that's because our stain probably isn't fully dry. It's only had about a 45-minute dry time, but we wanted to get this video in today. So a couple more little patches of that. What we're doing at this point is just trying to spread the wax on the floor. Thicker isn't better with wax. That's a common misconception. You basically want it as thin as possible, but still uniformly penetrating into the floor. So this feels pretty good now. It's kind of gliding across the floor pretty effortlessly. You can see only a couple fingers on the buffer here. No friction whatsoever. So this will be enough to finish up the panel. I don't know if you can see the sheen on the floor. We got some kind of harsh lighting coming through the door here, but there should be like a shimmer and maybe a little bit of swirl in the shimmer of the wax. Not sure if you can see that in the video or not. So again, at this point, we're just spreading the wax around. So I kind of went over the whole floor. I'll go over it a quick second time here. That's just to make sure I'm spread out evenly. And then I'll even go over it a third time just because I need to bring the buffer back toward me anyway. One of the things I really like about waxing is how physically easy it is. There's nothing hard about what we do with waxing. It can be. It depends on your application. So 1 to 2 coats is the proper amount. But keep in mind, more wax doesn't offer better protection. You actually want less wax. So 99% of the wax problems that I get are too much wax on the floor, and how do I get it off? So not putting too much on eliminates the possibility of having too much on there. So some people will do the wax and the polishing in 2 steps. I like to do 3. And I don't think I'm doing any extra work. I think the 3 steps are easier and faster than just doing the 2. So our next step here is we're going to hit the floor with steel wool. And this is a crucial step. Some people will apply, I'm actually going to leave this on. Some people will apply with the steel wool, and that's fine. It's eliminating this first application step. But I like to do it in 2, it's kind of more times over the floor to make sure I've spread the wax evenly and nicely. So the steel wool is the key though, absolutely crucial to the system that steel wool is involved in the process. So we're going to, oh boy. Stay on. Of course not. I think I got it. Okay. So now we're going to do a little steel wool. Steel wool is so important because one, it's metal, and so the friction of the steel wool with the surface of the wood creates heat. And we want that heat because we want to melt the wax and help push it down into the floor. You don't need to move particularly slow, but you don't want to rush through this stuff either. Just kind of a uniform back and forth. You can't really overdo it. I wouldn't recommend sitting in the same spot for 5 minutes, but overlap halfway, back and forth, the length of the room. The goal is always just to, cut off any wax off the surface because we don't want it there. We want it down in the wood. Number 2 steel wool is what I recommend. And again, I'll just hit it a second time here. Again, very low friction. You can see I'm hardly holding onto the buffer. It shouldn't be fighting you at all. If you feel friction, that means there's not enough wax on the floor. If we got to this point and we're like, oh, wow, we missed this big spot over here, we could just repeat the first step as appropriate in that area and then continue on with step 2. You'll feel friction from it, either from too much, you'll see it. You'll see the buildup of the wax on the floor. If you don't have enough, you'll feel the friction. Yeah, so the DuraFinish, it's much more common to have too much of that product on the floor because people will put it on with a lamb's wool or roller and kind of spread it with no mechanical movement of it. And so they end up with a thick layer of wax. And then if they're not using steel wool, other things won't cut the wax off appropriately. So they end up with a scoopy mess that they can't buff through. And steel wool would be the appropriate thing to cut the wax back off with. Number 2, the whole way through. Yep. That's what we use for our burnish system, and that's what we use for wax. And here, we're just going to put a polish on. So we're using a carpet pad here, but other appropriate tools to use here. I really like a Tampico brush, particularly on older floors that are cracked or chipped, because the Tampico brush won't catch a flaker and tear it out of the floor. Burlap is also one of my favorite things to use, literally a piece of burlap from like a burlap sack. It has a little bit of abrasiveness to it, and in my personal opinion, gives the best kind of satin luster. Carpet works very well. You can even use the red pad, minus this one has the wax on it still, but a clean red pad. And if you want a higher polish to it, a higher luster, a white polishing pad, the thick white pad is appropriate. So a lot of different things that you can use here in this step. None of them are necessarily wrong, but you need to experiment for yourself to see what you like. And like I said, the Tampico offers some serious advantages on not tearing bad boards out of the floor. So most historical floors will get buffed with a Tampico brush. Again, very low friction, no pushing back from the buffer at all. That's really about it. You'd let that set up, and then you can put furniture back in several hours later or next morning.